higher education. I want to welcome you all to this very, very special conversation. So excited today to have Dr. Marybeth Gasman and Dr. Levon Esters here to talk about their new book, which I have right here, which is called The Power HBCU, The Power of Historically Black Colleges and Universities. So thank you both for being here with me today.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah,
so
thank you.
I read the book. It's so fascinating. And I want to talk with you about the format and structure in a bit. But first, tell me, why did you all write this book? Obviously HBCUs are so important, but I'm curious to know what was the impetus and force for bringing this book together? So I'll start with you first, Marybeth.
If we are completely 100% honest about this, we were actually asked to write this book by the publisher. I got a call from the publisher. I had written Envisioning Black Colleges, which was published back in 2007. And Greg Brighton from Johns Hopkins called me up and said, hey, it's really time. It is time for another HBCU book. Have you thought about that? And I said, well, I've been thinking about it, but I said, I'd really love to write it with an HBCU grad. And I immediately thought of Levon, because Levon and I have worked so closely and we've written together, we've presented together. He's been a visiting scholar at our center. And so I called him up and I said, Levon, I know you haven't written a book before, but would you be game for learning how to write a book, which this was a mentoring process too, in many ways, learning how to write a book, but about HBCUs. And he immediately said, oh my God, yes. And what I love about our collaboration is Levon is a two-time HBCU graduate, right? From FAMU and from North Carolina A&T. And then, I have been doing research related to HBCUs since I think I'm coming up on 25 years. And so I thought it was a great collaboration of someone who's actually lived the HBCU experience. And then, myself, who has been doing this research for a long time. And of course, I'm on boards of trustees and I serve on dissertation committees, and I've been to 103 of the 105 HBCUs, but that's not the same as Levon earning 2 degrees, right? So that's how it came about, because basically Johns Hopkins University Press said, you haven't written a book with us on HBCUs in a long time, and would you be open? And I have to say that at that point I was writing another book, but I just thought, given all that was going on and all the attention that HBCUs have been getting, it would be great to have a really comprehensive book that people could look to that really celebrates the power of HBCUs.
No, I appreciate that. And Levon, tell me what drew you to the project. Obviously, when I read this book, so much of you is in this book, which I love. I mean, because you're talking about your experiences at FAMU, and I think that's very important. But what drew you to this project?
Well, I mean, Marybeth, was spot on in terms of my initial reaction to when I was asked. But for me, not just being a two-time HBCU alum, but even throughout my career, I've been at this now in higher ed 20 years. And for about 15 of those years, I continue to stay engaged with HBCUs in terms of mentoring and advising students. I've had numerous projects with 17 of the 19 Black land grants. I still stay engaged in those ways. I still have currently 2 projects, even in my current role here at Penn State. So I stay engaged. And so it's not just for me, not just this notion of having graduated from 2 institutions, but staying engaged, giving back, seeing students through the pipeline, helping them reach their career goals. And again, even my current role as dean, although I won't have that same level of engagement in this current role, I'm still able to create a vision for the graduate school and try to help units across Penn State such that they can engage and they see the true value in working with these institutions. So for me, it just is part of my DNA. I tell people all the time, if you were to cut my arm, I bleed a mixture of orange and green and blue and gold. So when Marybeth reached out to me, as she said, I jumped on it. I jumped at the opportunity. It was a great learning experience, and I'm looking forward to seeing how folks around the country receive it.
Yeah, well, the format is very interesting because it really provides a nice historiography, I think, of HBCUs, its place in our nation. But it has these kind of interviews and personal anecdotes. So it's different, or it felt different for me as I was reading it, because it wasn't straight history, but there was enough history in there to help you understand the origins of these institutions and their values and the mission. But I loved hearing from individuals connected to these institutions, whether past and present, and of course, some of the challenges as well and the opportunities. And we'll talk about those. But talk a little bit about the format. Why did you all decide to go that route in terms of crafting this narrative?
First, keep in mind, I'm a historian, right? I'm trained as a historian. So there had to be the history in there. I mean, you can't talk about HBCUs without talking about the history, but we also wanted to create a book that kind of brought them into the 21st century as well, right? That really tells you what's going on. And one of the things that I've always loved about being a historian is doing oral history interviews. And we did over 100 interviews. And I have to say that was probably the most fun of doing this was Levon and I interviewing all these people, right? And we had a blast. Levon would sit and be like, some days he'd text me afterward and say, I can't believe I just got to talk to that person, right? So, and people were so wonderful saying yes to us. Some people who are super busy only gave us about 20 minutes, but that was okay. And then other people gave us an hour and a half, right? So we didn't want it just to be our voices. We wanted to weave in the beautiful stories, some stories of struggle, but more than that, stories of just championing causes, of overcoming things, of doing things for community, of caring beyond comprehension for other people. And we wanted those voices and those stories to be in it. And so for me, I love that part of the book. I love all those voices and stories. And Levon, I'm not sure what you would say. You know?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. Again, I think for me, what was so fascinating was several things. One, I mentioned to Marybeth several times, it was like an independent study. Just being able to sit and listen to some of the individuals that we talked to. I mean, it was just fascinating, man. Folks who are presidents and chancellors and vice presidents and those sorts of things. So being able to sit and learn from their experience of their engagement with HBCUs, from their having attended HBCUs, but also what I would add too is that we had, if I may say, just common folk that we interviewed. I mean, just regular everyday folks, Jamal, that you would see on the streets every day, just walking about your day. And so for me, that element added something, a nuance to it that was really powerful. I mean, you hear the stories. I mean, of course, their names are listed in the book. So for me, it was that combination of these highly successful folks, individuals, if you will, but then again, having common folk who just everyday people like myself and others, just that combination, I think added something to the book that I think really makes it powerful.
And I think what comes through in your voices as you both wrote this book is your passion and your love for these institutions. I mean, that's clear. It's almost infectious because you kind of read this and you're like, these folks really do love these institutions, are rooting for them, want them to succeed. And I think that's really important to note. The other thing that I think was fascinating in hearing those voices from those interviews that you did with all of these people was there was a sense, at least as I interpreted, that they wanted to tell their narrative, that their story, because so much I think of the HBCU narrative has in some ways been hijacked by others. So again, to be able to speak that. And I know that you even mentioned in the book Stanley Nelsons, which is why I think his documentary was so important on HBCU, because it allowed people to be able to tell their story. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, and we interviewed Stanley. It was so, I had been in that documentary, so I knew him, and he's such a generous person anyway. And we interviewed him, and he talked extensively about that, how important it is for people who went to HBCUs or at HBCUs to be able to use their voice, tell their story. And one of the things that I love, and Levon, I know you really love this too, is people told complicated stories, complex stories. They told the good, but they also told their frustrations. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I love the most that we noticed at the end is the number of people who ended up being presidents of HBCUs who grew up on HBCU campuses, which is just, it's like from, starting from the very beginning. And we started to notice it over and over and over that would happen. Or the number of people who ended up working at HBCUs who grew up at HBCUs, right? And those beautiful stories of their parents taking them to campus, of them going to daycare on campus, of them going to school near campus, right? And then going back and working on that campus as either a faculty member or administrator or maybe even a president, right? So I think for both of us, it was like this idea of getting all of these voices that maybe nobody ever asked them about their HBCU story, right? And they couldn't wait to talk. I mean, some of them literally sent us stuff after the interview, just kept sending us things.
One thing I would add is that, Jamal, you referred to it as well as Marybeth. Not only did we interview these individuals who had a deep appreciation for HBCUs, but at the same time, as Marybeth just articulated, that, they did offer up some criticism, if you will, but at the end of the day, if they had to do it all over again, they would still go back and attend an HBCU. And so for me, that love ran so deep that despite any challenges they may have experienced during that time, during their engagement or they're attending those institutions, it's still the love for those institutions took over, and it still propelled them and will propel them to attend again if they had that opportunity.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. I remember speaking with the late Julian Bond, who told me how he grew up on the campus of Lincoln University. And so, Marybeth, as you was mentioning that, and we hear those stories all the time, like individuals who grew up on Howard's campus or Hampton's campus, and then this just became an extension of who they were, right? Because they had kind of experience. It's very, very powerful in many ways. So how did you all decide? I mean, obviously you couldn't include all of the 105 HBCUs or interview everyone affiliate. Like, how did you all go through the process of deciding which institutions you would highlight, some of the leaders? Like, how was that decision made? Because I imagine it's a pretty ambitious task.
It definitely was. So there are a couple things. Nearly every HBCU is mentioned at least once in the book. There are a few, I think there might be two that aren't. There's an appendix in the back that has a little asterisk for everyone that's mentioned. So a couple of things. I mean, Levon and I, we sat down and we did a wish list, a dream list. Everyone who was affiliated with HBCUs that we wanted to talk to, right? So we made a really, really long list. And then we sent emails to everyone. And of course, not everyone responded, but a lot of people responded. We were so lucky to get like Ruth Simmons, right? Or Ibram Kendi, or, lots of really interesting people. And so we made that list. We did interviews with every single person who responded. And so that ended up being a lot of interviews, a lot of data, right? A ton of data. Then the other thing that we did is we used all kinds of national reports. We used all kinds of research. We used national data. We wanted this to be a really rigorously researched book as well, because as folks know who might be listening or watching, people attack HBCUs on the regular, right? That happens quite a bit. So we wanted it to be very, very rigorous. We ended up in many ways talking more in depth about universities that had more people who responded to us. But we also did another thing. We asked every single person we interviewed, tell us something that you think we might forget and not include in the book. Okay.
I like that. Yeah. I like
that. And so we got a lot of ideas from doing that by asking that question. And then another thing that we did is we went through, Levon and I, we did this thing while we were writing. I do this with every book I write, which is you do a read out loud, okay, when you're almost done. So I think we did two of them. And in a read out loud, we read the book to each other, okay? Levon couldn't believe we were going to do this. And I said, no, this is how you find the mistakes. And this is how you find the problems.
And you hear the voice.
You can hear them. Yeah, you can hear them. And when you just read to yourself, sometimes you kind of glaze over a little, with even your own work. So anyway, we did this read out loud. And as we're doing the read out loud, we write down things that are missing, things that we forgot, right? And I'm sure we forgot some things, but we really tried to think of everything and anything that would be really important. And I also want to say, of course, I've done research on this topic in the past, so has Levon, but there are so many other people who've also done research. So we read all their work and we cited all their work, because it's so important to be citing African-American scholars in particular who are doing work related to HBCUs. So we cite them extensively and we wanted to include them. That's one of the ways that we tried our best to be as inclusive as possible.
Yeah, and not just the inclusivity that you mentioned, Marybeth, but as you stated, I mean, the rigor that we used that guided the writing of the book is just a whole nother level, in my opinion. And this is the standard for Marybeth, of course. But also, I think what I would add too is, you know, as we interviewed these individuals, you know, Jamal, you know, many of them I did not know, as like Marybeth does, but you know, you start the conversation of the interview, but so far, you know, at one point during the interview, it started to become just a conversation. Like we were just having coffee, friends sitting at a table. And so for me, and then even at the end, I mean, we were laughing throughout the conversations. Times we had to say, stay focused, you know, to each other, Marybeth and I. But it was truly an experience. I mean, again, you talk about some of the folks that we interviewed, from Stanley Nelsons to Ruth Simmons. I mean, these are folks that, you know, I observe and see in the public eye, but being able just to sit down and have a conversation. And I think that also added an element to the data that we were able to gather from these individuals. So I just wanted to add that as well.
No, I appreciate that. You know, there's been this renewed interest, of course, in HBCUs, in large part because of, you know, our leaders like Kamala Harris, who went to Howard University. But even when you talk to presidents, they talk about the increase in enrollment. I think Morgan State University, you know, is off the charts, and other institutions as well. So that's been a very positive thing. And in some ways, Marybeth, I know over the years we've talked about this kind of where people began questioning whether or not HBCUs are even relevant or timely today. I think in many ways we've kind of gotten past some of that. And maybe you all disagree with me on that, but I think we've kind of gotten past a lot of that. But yet there are these challenges. And I was just talking yesterday with Freeman Rabowski, actually, and we were talking about the number of vacancies at HBCUs in terms of presidential leadership. So wonderful story here, great narrative in history, but we have these challenges now. And I guess I was wondering, what do you make of the current state? And again, I don't want to suggest that all HBCUs, and you all are very good at this, to say that HBCUs are not monolithic. They're very, very different, because, you know, often we say, oh, HBCUs, we act like Howard and FAMU are the same, and they're not. But are you concerned about the leadership piece of where we are now with, again, so many vacancies, lots of turnovers, issues with boards and governance? Any thoughts?
Well, so here's an interesting thing. As we were writing this, of course, through all the interviews and the research, a lot of challenges did come up. People were really frank, and I appreciated them, and Levon as well. We appreciated them, but we ended up having a conversation about, okay, so how do we express these, but do it with context, and also in many ways do it with love, right? Because and so we have a chapter in the book on challenges and calls to action. But right after that chapter, we have a chapter called Opportunities to Sustain the Future, right? So I bring that up because one of the challenges in the book is leadership. And, you know, I always tell people when they call me about the leadership challenges at HBCUs, because I've been doing research related to HBCUs since 1994, I've seen this leadership challenge. I think this is about the third or fourth time. So about every decade, you'll get, like, you know, sort of a decade, maybe every 7 years or so, you'll get this really high turnover. It usually kind of, you know, works its way out, but it's really difficult right now just because of all the things going on in the country. It's a really, really difficult time. So I do worry about that. I worry about the way that Black women are treated. I worry about boards. I'm on 2 boards. I'm so grateful that they are highly functioning boards. Shout out to Morris Brown College and Paul Quinn College. Highly functioning boards, highly functioning presidents with good relationships that took a lot of work, right? You got to do that work. I will say that this is an aside from the book, but for our MSI Aspiring Leaders program that we run out of the Rutgers Center for Minority Serving Institutions, we are adding a comprehensive board president program. And we're gonna open that up, a virtual part, open that up to the whole country to be able to talk more about those issues. So we brought those issues up in the book: boards, presidents, and there are other challenges too. Like another example would be, you know, it's very difficult when alumni and students start to kind of go on the attack on social media, and that, you know, HBCUs are having to contend with a lot of bad press. So what do, right? What happens in those cases? Because sometimes students have legitimate beefs, and sometimes alumni do, and sometimes they might misunderstand things. So there are lots of challenges we bring up, but there are also so many opportunities that are out there for HBCUs. So yeah, I am concerned, but I have seen HBCUs weather this storm before.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I would add, if I may, is, all institutions have issues at leadership. So I think that's one thing I want to state. But I think often what happens is, and both of you know this, right, is that HBCUs are often an easy target for the media and others, politicians, like to use that as that measuring stick or that point of or example in the media. I just think that, but in terms of your question, Jamal, I think that programs like the one Marybeth, the Aspiring Leaders Program, and others, and folks like yourself, Jamal, the extent to which we can really help support leaders and put in place programs that can help them get the experience they need, I think in the end, not too long to the future, that we'll be okay. We'll hit a point, we'll go through some turbulence, but then we'll hit a point of that cruising altitude, as like the saying, and things will work out for the better.
Oh, and also some of the leadership programs, Marybeth, that you and your center sponsor, where you're bringing in individuals from minority serving institutions interested in potentially taking on leadership roles, makes me hopeful that our institutions will in fact be safe and secure for the future, not just HBCUs, but MSIs, I think, in general. What do you hope folks get from this book? And I always ask that question, and I know it's a very general question, but I'm sure you have your own kind of what you want people to take away from as they embark on the book. Again, I want to encourage all of our readers and listeners to get a copy. I think this should be taught in graduate schools. I think undergrad students could read this. So professors thinking about what to add to your syllabus in the future, I would put this book here, because I think it provides a very nuanced and wonderful understanding about our institutions in a way that I think allows them to shine. So what are your hopes that people take away from the book?
The book is written for a general audience, so that anybody can read it. I personally try to write all my books that way because I don't like to use academic speak. But it's so important because we wanted HBCU alumni, potential students, parents, everybody to be able to read this book. So I just wanted to say that, and then I'm happy to chat, but Levon, talk about takeaways.
But that accessibility piece, Marybeth, you mentioned is so important, because again, we need to make our work beyond the ivory tower for sure.
Yes.
Sorry, Levon.
Yeah. So for me, I mean, there's so many things that come to mind, Jamal, based on the question you asked. I think for me, these are truly powerful institutions. I was thinking this morning, I would not be dean of the graduate school at Penn State if it weren't for my experience at FAMU, which is where it all started. If I would have attended one of the other schools that I mentioned in the book, State Institution in Illinois, I probably wouldn't be on that same path that got me to the place where I am today. A lot of who I am, a lot of my identity was cultivated on the campus of FAMU and A&T. And for that reason, I'm forever indebted to those institutions, but for all the other 103 as well. Several of my friends and family members have bought this book. And to Marybeth's point, it speaks to anyone. It speaks to an academic. It speaks to a high school student. It speaks to just anyone can read this book and get something from it. And really, upon reading the book, they will come away really, truly understanding that these institutions are of extreme value to our society.
Yeah.
And they're not going away. Nor should they. And so for me, being able to be a part of this writing experience, being able to learn from those we interview, and to see my experience reflected in through those interviews was powerful for me. And so it just further confirmed that the choice that I made 25 years ago, so to attend my first HBCU, was the best decision for me and the right decision for me. I'm just excited for the book, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it's received in the coming weeks and months.
Thank you so much.
And I was going to say, I was so glad that Levon just brought up his identity development, right? Because we have a whole chapter on identity and culture. We also talk about culture. I think this is where people can pick up the book and just really connect with it and say, especially if you're an HBCU grad or you're an HBCU student, and say, oh man, that's how I felt, right? I mean, because we look at identity through the eyes of someone like Ibram Kendi, or through Kamala Harris, or through Ruth Simmons, or Harold Martin, president of North Carolina A&T, or we have all of these folks. We also have a lot of young alumni and talking about their identity development. And so I think that's one of the things that's really important. I also think that I'll tell you one thing I was thinking about as we were writing the book is I would like more people who work in corporations, at foundations, at majority institutions to read this book so that they will stop talking down to HBCUs and realize the immense power within the HBCU community. I think some of that has happened, but not always, not always. I think sometimes people will talk about HBCUs in derogatory ways. And this book gives you all the evidence to be able to talk about HBCUs in incredibly positive ways. And, you can talk about the challenges, but you also have to remember the context that creates those challenges. And so for me, that's probably one of the most important things. And then if we're just to talk in the practical, I would love this book to result in HBCUs getting more donations from alumni, from wealthy donors, from corporations, from foundations. I would love that to happen. Yesterday we saw, the Lilly Foundation give $100 million endowment to the United Negro College Fund. That is so exciting, so historic. I want to see more and more and more and more of that. And hopefully this book helps.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Dr. Levon T. Esters is the Dean of the Graduate School and the Vice Provost for Graduate Education at Penn State University. And Dr. Marybeth Gasman is the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Endowed Chair and a distinguished university professor at Rutgers University. And the book is HBCU, The Power of Historically Black Colleges and Universities, published by Johns Hopkins Press. And I urge you all to get a copy. Read it, set up book clubs and discussions, really do what Dr. Gasman said, give back to our institutions, and let's continue the conversation. So thank you both for being here. This was a wonderful conversation. And again, I want to encourage everyone to get a copy of the book.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thanks so much.